That's how bad evidence-based medicine has become. Because if it was good, like I can tell you, there's going to be centralized doctors that listen to this. They're going to have a problem with what I'm saying to you.
The thing is, I was going to close it on how does nicotine change time dilation? Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah, and today we have the long-awaited part 2 of my interview with Dr. Jack Kruse. You can now join this channel for priority answers to questions and comments. And also I have a monthly membership group and a variety of courses if you want to make practical changes in your life and you need some help. So we'll just dive into the last minute of the previous interview because it's completely different part 2 to part 1, just so we can begin where we left off.
I think we need medical freedom laws in countries, in constitutions. Why? No government should have control over your health. Zero. Even when they're paying the healthcare bill, there has to be informed consent between the patient and the doctor. And that should be the gold standard. And that's not what's present anywhere in the world. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try to fix that problem next.
Yep. That's something I think. What's so easy is that you can, like I've done following you and other people, you can take on board what you've said. And even if you have to move to a different latitude, I know I've changed the subject a bit. I think people think, well, okay, if I can't have my health service or my doctors, what do I do instead? And that's why I just keep bringing it back to physics, that biology and pills and stuff are not the answer. Yes, we're brilliant at operations and rebuilding accidents on the road, but when it comes to metabolic disease, which is the huge problem where people are just not getting better, they keep asking, well, what can I do instead? And this is again the other aspect of why people might think you're an a-hole, but all you're trying to do is give us free options to try and help ourselves. But that's the thing, people won't take.
You want to hear the craziest thing, Sarah, about this whole thing? I was thinking about this while you were talking. The crazy thing is some of the people in the NHS right now, if they did have their healthcare taken away because they moved, say, to the 9th latitude in Costa Rica, just that alone being subtracted from their healthcare system may improve their health. That's how bad evidence-based medicine has become. Because if it was good, like I can tell you, there's going to be centralized doctors that listen to this. They're going to have a problem with what I'm saying to you. But here's the bottom line that you come back to. This is a simple math equation. The return on equity for evidence-based medicine is horrendous. Every country you look, it's not good. But instead of talking about that, they want to talk about how the evidence is parsed. I mean, the classic example that's going on in Twitter right now is about all the nonsense around, gender identity medicine and transition. None of that is evidence-based. It's all ideologic-based, but everybody wants to lie about it and say, well, this is how it goes. And fundamentally, this goes all the way back to the light story. It goes back to the story that you wanted to talk to me about. It goes back to the kaleidoscope, to the mitochondria. Sometimes subtracting out what is harmful for you is the best thing you can do. I tell my members that has a name. It's called via negativa. You subtract the superfluous and magically you get better. I think many different things in centralized medicine we need to do that for. I do agree with your assessment that we're good at like acute trauma medicine, like subdurals, epidurals, fixing broken hips, broken femurs, broken fingers, things like that. What we suck at is dealing with hypothyroidism, diabetes, obesity, melanoma, skin cancer, kidney disease, heart disease. We are horrible, or neurodegeneration, which is, explosive, autism. I mean, I can put the list up, and that's what we need to be using taxpayer dollars to fund the NHS and the NIH, the FDA and the CDC. Instead, we have a system set up that is enriching the people who are keeping us sick. It makes no sense at all. And until the apathy of the global voter, I'm going to tell you, I think This isn't just the United States problem. I know the United States sneezes and the world gets sick because everybody follows us. But I'm going to tell you, I think in smaller little countries who are sick and tired of being lied to by centralized science and not getting the results they need, they don't have $4.3 trillion to spend on their healthcare system. Some little countries like El Salvador only have $380 million to spend. So guess what? A mistake like the jab is a huge fucking big deal to that country. And the thing is, you have to foster a system within a country so that the doctors control the system to protect the public health. In other words, you go back to that oath. That oath's a big deal. And the doctors tell the government, look, you need to stay out of the decision-making process, even though you guys are the payer of last resort. You need to let the doctors do it with the patients. And there's going to be sometimes patients make mistakes, but guess what? If the patient chooses something, say from functional medicine that they really believe, like say glutathione's a good idea, and they ultimately succumb to it, that's on them. In other words, there was informed consent. But within the system, the patient should be able to go get an opinion from a decentralized physician, an allopathic doctor, a naturopathic doctor, a chiropractor, and I'm even okay with a shaman. And let's see, how the chips fall. And patients need to be given the pros and cons of each system. If you do that, within about 2.5 decades, you're going to find out who's full of shit and who's not full of shit. In other words, you can create a system that's based on meritocracy. In other words, meritocracy of the good ideas, because you subtract out the bad ideas. And the way you limit the doctors is you put huge penalties on them. And those penalties will be financial based. Why? Because doctors cannot practice voodoo medicine if you penalize them financially. Now, doctors who are good doctors who are doing the right thing, they will have nothing to worry about. And ultimately, when you run this cycle, this decentralized loop, people listening to this should actually be reminded, where did I get this idea? From evolution. Because that's what evolution does. It kills off bad ideas. That's what extinction events are all about. That's why animals go extinct, because they're no longer optimized for the environments they live in. That's the exact same idea that should take place in allopathic medicine, functional medicine, chiropractic medicine, naturopathic medicine, and even decentralized medicine. I can tell you, in the decentralized medicine world, and I know you participate with some of these people, there's wackadoodles there too. Some of them are my former members.
Back to those diseases you mentioned, the autism, hypothyroid, depression, Parkinson's, all of those are UVA and sunrise fixable conditions, especially the UVA, because that's something that I've really, that's one of my favorite topics, along with deuterium. And how can a doctor not, you can, and I'm not making stuff up about people who've never heard us talk before about how powerful UVA and a sunrise is for those conditions you just listed, the most difficult ones to cure. And that's the deficit. It's missing the sunrises and not enough UVA and UVB light.
Well, you got to remember, though, too, I don't want people who live at high latitudes to get left out here. I mean, you happen to be one of those people. That's part of the reason why I did 2 podcasts recently with the 2 Viking guys and the Owen Cheeseby one. Why? Those podcasts were for the critics out there that were saying, well, Jack says, if you're sick, you just need to move to a low latitude and you're good. No, you need to understand why you can make it still at a high latitude, but realize that when you get a mitochondrial disease that changes the kaleidoscope that you're interested in, you may not be able to do it in Edinburgh. You may not be able to do it in London. You may not even be able to do it in Cannes or even at, Cairo. You may have to do something different. The analogy there is like you're on the deck of the Titanic. You have the choice to listen to music or jump in the cold water and get to a boat to save your life. You need to understand that is the thought process behind mitochondrial medicine. Not everybody needs to move to a low latitude.
But also,
and remember, People at a high latitude, though, don't get UVA light all the time.
But I can swim in a lake, which I do when I'm not here at 6 a.m. in the morning, and it's like 45 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter, and I can make my own UV light inside. Correct. And also
That's a different story now. Remember, I don't want people to listen to this and think Sarah's saying, oh, well, when she's at 52 latitude in London, you're getting UVA, because for most of the year, you're not getting any environmental UVA. You can get UVA when you're getting in the cold water in the UK. That you can do. See, that's the story of the non-visual photoreceptor system. That's the story of melanin. That's the story of water. That's the story of how mitochondria are changed by the physics of temperature. And the point that I try to make on those two other podcasts, people don't realize that the circadian mechanism in everything in life is not only controlled by light, but what's the other big metric? Temperature. So those are the two key metrics. And when you begin to understand why it's temperature, that was how I figured out that there had to be some other pathway of light inside of us that was able to give us light that the sun couldn't provide from the environment. It's a very counterintuitive idea. So why did I go looking for it? For the reasons that I mentioned to you already. You look at all the aromatic amino acids and you look at the absorption and emission spectra. And you remember you asked me a question on Twitter before we did our last podcast about cholesterol, vitamin D, and all that. And I told you what the difference was back then. You need to realize that there is a way for you to create your own light even when the sun isn't doing it. And it turns out alteration of temperature is the way in which you do it, especially if you're a mammal. Why? Because we're expert at it. We are really, really good. And it turns out the best mammals at that are uncoupled mammals, okay? Those are mammals that don't have L0, L1, L2, and L3 mitochondria, okay? Those mammals don't need a ton of their melanin inside like we do, because they have a lot of melanin on the outside to protect them from equatorial sun, and they're getting so much of it that they can capture tons in the neuroectoderm tissue called the skin to run their non-visual photoreceptor problem. You and me, we both are Northern European haplotypes, light skin, bluer eyes, hazel eyes. We have a totally different program. We lost our melanin on the outside and we internalized it because we were taking advantage of the cold temperatures. When did that all change? When we started wearing clothes and down jackets and going inside, and Henry VIII, having fires and things like that. And I mentioned to people, if you don't think that this is an age-old issue, Sarah, think about the proof that we have from a guy like Peter Unger. You as a silver member will listen to the recording. Peter Unger is the world expert in mammalian skulls. He has studied the Anubian skulls that built the pyramid. The same time period, he knows about the pharaohs. The pharaohs have brains and occlusions that look just like the people in modern UK. But the Anubians, perfect dentition, perfect skeletal features in their skull. Why? Because they were outside in the sun building the goddamn pyramid at the 28th latitude. Like, the data is there. You know what the problem is? Nobody's looking at it. Nobody's making sense of it, as you said before, because they have a biological perspective, not a biophysical perspective.
The other thing that is important is darkness, because in the UK, in the winter, we've got more darkness. So people can just, as you said, turn the lights off, go to bed earlier, and then sleep longer, make more melatonin, because that's another defense system. And that does a light show in the middle of the night because it's releases its light store from the day. And people think it's a hormone of darkness. And that's another one. People tell me I'm wrong for for being against melatonin supplements. So that's another thing. If people in the UK,
one of my former members goes out there all the time telling people to take ungodly amounts of melatonin. In fact,
But
I just found out I'm not going to say who it was, but one of my former members who listened to that former member now just developed an ocular melanoma. How do you like that?
but also,
Do not listen. Do not listen to people who tell you to take ungodly amounts of exogenous melatonin. And the reason I'm concerned about this, I wrote a blog on LinkedIn in 2018 that our children who are all afflicted by non-native EMF are now melatonin junkies. Every pediatrician, you think pediatricians are bad for sticking jabs in these kids? You should see how many prescriptions they're writing for melatonin now, because none of these kids can sleep.
But then melatonin does apoptosis like crazy. So can it not, give you like retinal problems and perform apoptosis in the wrong tissue? Because that's the other thing that people don't understand.
It can cause that, but ultimately what it eventually causes, it breaks apoptosis completely. In other words, it doesn't work anymore. Remember how it works, Sarah. This is very, very simple. When you make something endogenously, you take something exogenously, you down-regulate the endogenous system. Okay, I use the analogy.
If you can make it, don't take it.
Right, but the where that idea comes from, just so you know, is from Yellowstone Park. I went to a group of ophthalmologists in 2017 and showed them Dr. David Attenberg's video that he did of Yellowstone Park. And when we took the predator out, which was the wolf, the rivers changed. And it sounds crazy when you hear it. Well, the video that I showed them, it's only like 2 minutes long. You could still find it on YouTube. Explain what happens when you take a naturally coupled cycle and you remove predator from prey. It destroys everything. Like, the collateral effects are stunning. That's exactly what you're doing when you take exogenous melatonin. It's like taking the wolf out of Yellowstone Park and then thinking that it's not going to change the rivers that run through your ophthalmic artery on your retina. It's absolutely preposterous. And the science is deep in this, okay? This is the reason why I'm done really fucking around with people. I'm done calling them out. They need to be called out. If people keep listening to ignorant and stupid people, they deserve what they get. That's the way I feel now. And even if some of those people are my former members who think they know what's going on, I'm going to call them out too.
That's the thing. And it also, because we've mentioned mitochondria and heteroplasmy so much, that's something I've took on board from you about. I've only got a limited amount of supply of mitochondria. So at my age now, in my late 40s, I don't want to be sequestering them in my muscle anymore, really. And then there's, yes, I have got enough muscle to get me by, but I think this is something where the whole 6-pack and 8-pack, and if you look ripped, you're going to live longer. People really don't understand this idea about where you choose to put your mitochondria. So if I wanted to, it is by just laying off resistance exercise and focus it. How do you ensure that you keep your mitochondria? I need them in my heart and my brain now. For the listeners,
the easiest way to do it is just do what I've told people. I'm okay with people exercising and doing all that. I'm not okay with them doing it in a gym. I want them to do it outside in nature. If they want to pick up heavy things, do it outside, because guess what? The feedback loops that control mTOR will take care of the muscle hypertrophy. In other words, you will never get as big as Sean Baker is. Sean Baker, who's a big carnivore guy, orthopedic surgeon, who's got massive muscle hypertrophy, thinks that this is the facade of health. It's not. Peter Addy is going down the same route. Why? They don't understand mitochondrial medicine. So most of the bro science that they sell is extremely popular. Okay, it's really popular in the Bitcoin community. It's really popular in the carnivore community. And when I point this out to people, I was like, look, if you don't believe me, just go, read some of Dr. Doug Wallace's work. If you don't believe Uncle Jack, go read what he says. We are not gorillas. We're not designed to hypertrophy our muscles as we age. Why? Because as we age, heteroplasmy rate goes up. So if you're burying it all, what are you doing? It's actually the story of robbing Peter to pay Paul. This is the reason why it sets you up for neurodegeneration, sets you up for heart disease. And I famously told the story of one of my former clients, who was a good friend of mine, who died of heart disease looking like Sean Baker. And I warned him for literally 10 years. This was going to happen. Most of the NFL players that I take care of, once their career's over, first thing I tell them to do to protect their brain is actually lose their muscle mass. I do exactly opposite what Sean does and exactly opposite what Adia does. Because remember, what's my day job, Sarah? I'm a brain surgeon. I know that we bury our mitochondrial capacity in our central nervous system, our hearts. That's where human mammals, Homo sapiens, are designed to put them. If you want to have, you want to live to 80, 82, 85 years with never seeing a doctor. That's how you want to do it. And I'm not just like I'm not anti-vax, I'm also not anti-exercise. I'm telling you, I'm okay with exercise. Just do it outside.
Yeah, exactly. Like my lake swimming and doing my Pilates in the garden. It's another thing also with body fat. Fat has got stem cells in it and water. So people demonize body fat. Yet there's lots of reasons going around in my head. Sometimes I think, is it trying to protect people from EMFs and building it there?
Of course it is. Just think about, look, you're a really smart lady. I mean, I'm just going to flip this right around to you and let you do the podcast with me now. Tell me about the infant brain. Can you imagine if we had Kim Kardashian idea or Sean Baker's idea, or I don't know, any person that tells you that having excess fat in your body is somehow a bad thing? What if we did that to all human babies and we made them all anorexic?
Well, babies are really fat and their brains are not developed properly.
There you go. And guess what? Why are humans getting fat? Because they live in an environment that is destroying their brains and their hearts. That's the reason Peter Attia still hasn't figured out that the number one cause of death in humans is brain disease and heart disease. But yet, what is he doing? What's his advice that he's a New York Times bestseller in longevity? To shred your muscles to somehow improve this. It's psychotic. It is absolutely psychotic. And I will promise you this, because I do talk about this. We did another podcast when I was in LA, me, Rick, and a guy named Bill Gifford, because Rick Rubin is going to make a movie about my work. Okay. We talked about this very issue loud and clear to get the centralized perspective and the decentralized perspective. I'm okay with people listening to your podcast and saying, I just don't accept what Jack's saying. I'm okay with that. But remember what I always tell you and I tell the members. It's the mark of an educated mind to take something you fundamentally don't believe, examine it for yourself and decide. Let me tell you something. Every fat little human being becomes a svelte human, usually by 25 years old. The reasons that modern humans are not getting that way is because they're in an environment that chronically steals energy from their brains and their hearts. So guess what happens? The body keeps its fat. That's exactly what it is. It's a protective mechanism. And the more you're in bad environments, the harder you're going to find it to lose weight. And guess what? The same thing is true with postmenopausal women. Like, I don't care what analogy you want to use, Sarah, but the best one, because I know you're a really smart girl, it's the human brain as an infant. I mean, I would love for you to sit down with your countrymate, Michael Crawford, and have this discussion, like do a podcast with him after you've done this one with me, and just talk about the human brain as an infant. You'll be surprised to know that the cerebral metabolic rate of oxygen consumption of a child's brain is greater than mine or yours right now. They have the most incredible Ferrari engine in their head that's immature. They need the fat to make the CO2, to make the protons, to make the water. That's the raw materials of what the brain works on biophysically. You know in your own career that everybody has told you from the time you went into school to probably even now that the brain works on glucose. That is total bullshit. It works on lactate.
Yeah.
And you know that now because you've read some of the later papers. But guess what? The bro science guys, the guys like Adia and Sean Baker, they still think that glucose is a huge problem, which is why they're both pushing fat and protein. They're basically pushing a wintertime diet for people while hypertrophying their muscles. That is a classic circadian mismatch story. You can get away with it for a period of time before something goes awry. And the point that I like to make to people is look at the human life cycle very critically. Babies have a lesson for you. I've written blogs about babies. I've written blogs about Nir Barzilai, who is probably got the biggest collection of supercentenarians on the planet at Albert Einstein Medical Center in New York. That's high latitude, 42 latitude. And guess what you find? None of those people look like Peter Adia. None of them look like Sean Baker. None of them look like Michelangelo's David. They're all short, fat, dumpy little people. It's kind of amazing. And they all, if you really assay them, get further, you'll notice they have somatic mutations in testosterone and IGF-1. Oh, should we blow up the anti-aging doctor stuff who want to push, growth hormone and testosterone like the guys at Cenogenics, in Las Vegas? Hey, look, you can do the things that you want to do. Who am I? What am I? I'm the dude with the flashlight that's going to tell you that I promise you, I've parsed the data, read more papers than all of those guys combined. And I tell people the truth. I don't sell you nothing. Only thing I sell you is two things: information and how to think. What's this podcast that you and I are doing right now? This is a thinking podcast. Like, people are going to watch this podcast with me and you, and they're going to go, man, Jack thinks about this completely differently than those guys do. But you know what? Those guys have more followers and more Twitters and all the other crap. It doesn't matter to me. Why? Because evolution says what it says. People will get taken to the woodshed. Extinction events happen. Disease happens.
Aren't there lots of studies to show that if you follow the masses, it always ends in tears, and it's been proven over and over? And it's like Einstein.
Wasn't that the story of COVID? Wasn't that the story of COVID? I mean, think about it. Let's use current events. I mean, your country right now, I just posted something on Twitter the other day. Front page of the Daily Mail, AstraZeneca goes boom. I mean, could you imagine that 3 years ago, that the Daily Mail would put something like out there? But look, we've all lived through this. I mean, the reason why my message, Sarah, is beginning to resonate, the reason why everybody wants to do a podcast with me right now, is because people are beginning to wake up that maybe I was right. They're going, he's an asshole. He's hard to deal with, but it's really hard to refute what he's saying. And the best part of the story, if you're really listening closely, doesn't cost too much to be a black swan mitochondriac. Doesn't cost too much to go from the biologist to the quantum biologist, to pay attention to guys like Jim L. Kaluuya, to pay attention to Nick Lane, pay attention to Doug Wallace. Go back and reread, what's in Roland Van Wyck's book. Go back and reread what's in Becker's work. There is magic in what those people had to say. Like, I feel like right now, Sarah, and I know Rick Rubin has told me this personally, I think this is the reason why he's doing the movie on me, that guys like Albert St. George, guys like Becker, their work, it's going through centralized medicine for the last 75 years, like the Library of Alexandria. We're burning it down. And we're going to go through 800 years of the Dark Ages. And Rick wants to use his cachet, his money, and his power to save this work for the people who are going to listen to your podcast and go, you know what Sara and Jack talked about here, this is kind of interesting.
But it's the same as Wikipedia deleting the SV40. It's just on a bigger scale. And it's like you say, right. We've had numerous, don't we only have like 10% of our history anyway, going back 2000 years or more? So we don't know anyway. So it's like you say, you have to keep bringing up Becker and the semiconduction of bone and Albert St. Georgie and just spread it everywhere, because somebody has to pick up the torch. But do you think Jim Al-Khalili's picked up the torch, or do you think?
I think he's definitely one of the people that pick up the torch. But I think you saw yourself. I mean, you watched the Huberman 1 and 2 podcast.
I watched it about 5 times because, like what
did I say to him? What was my message to him? I wasn't there to be student and teacher and take him apart. I was saying, dude, you need to get this right, because you're teaching medical students. Those kids that he's teaching, those are the people I'm worried about, that they're never going to get the message that you and I are talking about. And then, when I go back out to meet Bobby Kennedy and go back out and have time for him to talk to me, and he doesn't want to talk. And then we find out that Stanford University is involved in censorship with the government and social media. And then we find out that their dean just had to be fired because he was publishing fraudulent research. I mean, I don't think this is conspiracy theory. I think this is the modus operandi. And people forget that after Huberman came on the podcast, remember, it wasn't his podcast, it was Rick's. You realize the same thing that happened with SV40 went on with Andrew's page. They went after Andrew. So what am I trying to tell you? None of this is conspiracy. There is a modus operandi to what's going on. And the people that listen to your podcast, I'm hoping that there's more than 1 or 2. I'm hoping there's at least 50% of the people that listen to this understand truly what the fuck is going on in centralized science and say, I'm sick and tired of this shit. I'm not going to be apathetic anymore. I'm not going to vote for these fucking assholes. Okay? Like the Richie Sunaks, or the jackass who's the mayor of London, or fucking Trump, or the other jackass Biden. These are the people. It's a uniparty that's out there, and we need people who are young to take over the world. Sara, the people who will listen to this that are 15, 20, 30 years old, this is their world. They need to give 2 fucks about what's going to happen in the future. Okay? Look, I got the gray beard. I'm here. I'm more passionate about leaving the world in a better place than I found it in, that I'll put the target on my back. Somebody on Twitter just said to me the other day, after listening to you and Bobby talk, I'm worried about your safety. You know what my answer to her was? I'm worried about 7 billion of you. Keep going into the sausage grinder every day because it's easier to take Joe Mercola's supplements or Dave Asprey's bullshit or Sean Baker's diet. Stop being a lemming for the system. Begin to think for yourself. Become decentralized. Question everybody and everything. Then start talking to different experts. That's what Rick does. Rick's friends with some of these guys.
Because also,
he bounces things off of all of us. He's trying to find the truth.
Same here, but then I take what you say. I don't believe you the first time, and I just test everything, even moving to a different everything. It's the same with everybody. I'm an N of 1, but I can test it, and then I can then pass it on and then tell other people to do it, and they will listen because they saw me do it or they saw me change. And and when I unpack all of this, and even people who've never met you before, if they go back to the leptin story, the leptin reset, that's the beginning of the story. It just, to me, makes perfect sense, and I just can't understand how people. It's not complicated. It
breaks the paradigm of belief, Sara. That's the problem. Let me just tell you something. When you go after someone's paradigm of belief, it's a huge issue. Just remember, the leptin story, for me, that's how I came to this. But the dominant paradigm that's still out there is calories in, calories out.
But that's why
it's not going to change.
But it has to, because that's why I opened this podcast talking about different energy storage systems in the body, from melanin to vitamin D to water, because people can't get this idea about people leak energy and then they get bigger and they just think I'm a lunatic. But it's like, well, look at all these people who can't lose weight. They're doing all the stuff that with calories in, calories out. So they need to be re-educated about how we're almost like some kind of sort of biological computer, and they can't grasp the concept of how they leak energy. So maybe
you don't worry about them. You just teach the people who have an open mind that say, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do it. Look, Sarah, I don't know why this confounds you. This is exactly what Mother Nature does. For the animals that don't listen to her, she takes them out. Simple as that. And that's exactly the same method that Uncle Jack uses. And you know what? The difference between me and Mother Nature is I'm fucking telling you exactly what I'm doing. She doesn't tell you a damn thing. It's your job, if you choose to accept it, to figure out her recipe. Understand, just like I said, Book of Genesis, it's all about light. They didn't lie. Problem is, they didn't tell you the recipe. And it's your job to figure the damn recipe out. It's your job to figure out just how counterintuitive light is, just how counterintuitive water is, just how counterintuitive magnetism is, and then sit down and do a series of podcasts. How many podcasts do you think I've done in my life? To sit down and explain.
Thousands.
Right. And guess what? Do I sit here with a book? No. Do I sit? This is all in my head. Why? Because I've tested, I've read. This is 20 years of work. I've looked for all the pieces and parts. I know how they fit. I have no illusions that 80% of the people that listen to this podcast won't do one goddamn thing I tell them, Sarah. But guess what? That's not why you and I do podcasts. You know why we do it? For the 20% who do get it. In other words, those are the people that are going to inherit the world. They're going to be the next iteration of Homo sapiens that do make the decisions once we get rid of Biden and Trump and everybody else. You know, all the World Economic Forum, all the people that have controlled the system all the way back to Rockefeller and the Flexner Report. Centralized medicine is a paradigm that needs to be destroyed. I just told my members on Sunday, somebody asked me a question about Buckminster Fuller, and I said, the best thing about Buckminster Fuller is one of the key quotes that's always attributed to him. He said, never try to fix a broken paradigm, blow it the fuck up. That is the story of my life in the last year. If you want to know what I've been up to, guess what? I got a stick of dynamite and a lit fuse. And that's what I'm doing. And if you don't believe me, you go back and look at the original Paleo FX keynote speech in 2011. What will you see in my hand, in this hand? A stick of dynamite and a lighter. Uncle Jack hasn't changed his message for 14 years.
Yeah, we just have to keep you here then. It's like, there's
no, you don't have to keep me here. What we need is young people. That's why you need to pick up pieces and parts. We need some of my young members that are medical students to pick up the pieces and parts. That's why we need guys like Huberman. He's going to teach 5 or 6 doctors who I'll never meet this stuff. The reason my friend Rick Rubin wants to make a movie is what I told you. He wants to keep the Library of Alexandria intact. He'll be the first one to tell you, not everything Jack says is true. I'll be the second one that seconds that opinion. But you know what? The one thing that he and I both think, I have more right than most of the rest of them. And guess what? We need to save what we have. Not only do we need medical freedom, let me tell you, the next thing you're going to hear me talk about in 2024 is internet freedom. That's why I just went to Lisbon. I just went to Lisbon at the behest of a group of people who wanted me to tell the truth about internet freedom and how it links to medical freedom and financial freedom. This is the next step to destroying the apathy of the people of the world. Tell them the truth and be very consistent about it over time, and make sure that there's real estate on the internet that is not polluted by centralized entities and corporations like Google, Meta, LinkedIn, Twitter. That is the key. Or Wikipedia, which we talked about here. That is the goal, Sarah. The goal is to have a place where people know that there's more truth there. Not all the truth, because the truth, remember, is never axiomatically true. Scientific method tells us it's designed to be replaced when we get new data. But we have to have a starting spot. And that starting spot is nature. That's the whole basis of decentralization. Decentralize everything in your life. Your money, your science, your medicine, and your internet freedom, your opinions, your freedom of speech. Everything needs freedom, liberty. You need to have the ability for the life that you want to live. You have to have the ability to question doctors, question newspapers, question people on the TV. Give them no quarter. I am passionate about this, Sarah. Passionate. I've been passionate about it for the last 5 years, and trust me, right now, I'm right over the target. And when you're right over the target, you know what happens? That's when you get the most shrapnel. And look at me. Do you think I give a fuck? I don't. Why? I have put a huge lever out there in the world. Now it's up to some of you listening to this podcast. It's up to you, Sarah, to continue to do podcasts and keep highlighting the good, the bad, and the ugly, and call it out. Don't be nice to your guests. When you hear bullshit, tell them, I think that's bullshit, and tell them why. Because guess what? That's exactly what we do in medicine. You heard when I did the podcast recently with my friend, Dr. Ted. That's what M&M conference is in medicine, where we tear each other's opinions apart. I personally think that's what podcasts should be. The best podcasts in the world, in my opinion, are when people don't agree. But guess what? That's not what the guardians of social media, especially like on YouTube, deem necessary. Why do you think I was the one that asked Rick to host the podcast between me and Bobby? Because I knew that black sheep couldn't be canceled. I'm not a dumbass. I know exactly what I'm doing.
What makes you care so much? Is it from, because I know a bit of
I saw how many people have been destroyed in my 40 years in medicine. I've seen people die. Look, I just finished trauma call, literally. What time is it? What time is it right now? Okay, it's 4:34. I just finished trauma call 12 hours ago. And 24 hours before that, I saw 6 people get pushed in the sausage grinder. And I couldn't pull them out. And guess what? When I started in medicine 40 years ago, it was close to 80, 90, 100% of people got put in. Right now, not everybody's being pushed in. Why? Even some of the centralized doctors realize that some of the shit that they were forced to do the last couple of years, they shouldn't be doing anymore. I actually sat down with one of the doctors and shared the RFK podcast. And you know, the irony was, turned out he told me that he went to Tulane Medical School. I said, oh, bro, when you listen to this, your head's going to explode. You need to know the history of where you went to medical school and what happened. Look, you're a Silver member. You heard what Jeff Rouse said on the Q&A. People in the podcast that we're doing right now, they won't hear it, but I know you did, and you will if you haven't heard it yet. And when you hear it, that'll answer your question for you, Sarah. Jack, why do you care? Because I'm fucking sick and tired of people being lied to. Okay? That's the truth. And the thing is,
I believe
you hear me say all the time, when you have a B, or when you accept a B, a C, or a D, and you have an A available, you have broken the key metric of being a black swan. Never settle for a B, C, or D if an A is available.
No, I believe you. I care because I can't stand children being harmed because the parents are stupid. That's something that makes me feel sick, because at least if I want to be a stupid talking monkey, and I don't go on technology much. I'm on it now, but I don't know anything about what you go on Twitter, but I really care about parents not listening to me because the kid is dependent on the parent. That's what really makes me angry. And it makes me so angry at the moment. I can't do anything about it yet because I'll just be so horrible. They'll block, that they won't listen to me. But that's something that really upsets me, is me and you can make decisions and we know things we shouldn't do and we choose to do them or not, so including doctors, but children haven't got a choice.
No, that's true. My focus though, and I don't want to use this in a negative, pejorative, or even a negative connotation when I say this, because I don't want you to take it that way.
I don't take anything anyway. Just say what you want. It's all about just truth.
I think it's myopic just to focus in on kids. Why? Because more adults are harmed than children are harmed right now. I mean, it's absolutely astounding to me what we're doing to the public health every day. I mean, look, I've even gone after guys in your country, Asim Malhotra. He's now flipped. He's now against the messenger RNA vaccines, but it took his father getting killed by the jab to do it. And that's not good enough for me. You know why? He's a doctor. He took the same oath I did. So why didn't he get it beforehand? So why am I passionate, Sarah? I look at my life like a seam. I remember how many people I harmed before the age of 40 for me. And those are the people why I do what I do. That's my penance. Okay? I don't go on Twitter and look for a mea culpa and now join the other team. I tell people I fucked up. I was part of the problem. I'm no longer part of the problem. I got a big mouth and I say what I say, and I don't give a shit what anybody thinks about it. Why? You'll know you're over the target. You'll know that you're speaking the truth when you got arrows in your back and people talk shit about you. But you know what the problem is? For it to bother me, I have to care what your opinion is, and I don't. All I care about is the 7 billion people on this planet that don't know enough to speak up for themselves. You don't have to be a child. You can be a little kid, or say an older person in India that has no idea what Meta's doing in your neighborhood with their call centers to cause 170 million people to be diabetic in the last 20 years. That's as bad a story as, the childhood vaccine issue with the schedule change. But you know what? Nobody looks at it that way, Sarah. Or when your government goes out and officially bans an incandescent bulb. How many people you think that affects?
Don't get me started. We're still allowed incandescent bulbs in the UK, but they're not in states, they're illegal. That's just criminal. And also, even just publishing studies telling us how dangerous UVA light is, I think that's criminal. That's the one thing we've got to save us.
I think it is, and I think that's part of the reason why, medical freedoms, internet freedom, and financial freedom are important. I think it's going to take some people a while to really understand why I'm passionate about all three of those things. But I think when all is said and done, and you guys throw dirt on me or burn me, whatever you want to do, when I'm dead, you're going to realize why I did what I did. I'm not asking you to like it. I'm asking you to understand it. I don't believe the system can be fixed from within. It has to be blown up. And the best way to blow that up is you start back and give people freedom, total freedom of decision-making. And then you take all the factions and run them against themselves, just the way evolution does. Like evolution creates a huge amount of species. And guess what? The species that adapt the best, they win. They get to survive. The ones that don't get taken to the woodshed. I think we should do exactly the same thing in medicine. I think it's, I don't want to say brilliant, but I think mimicking nature is not a bad game plan. The problem is a lot of humans out there, especially a lot of Europeans, are going to hear this and go, well, I don't know if I can get behind that because, I think everybody needs a trophy and we need to save everybody. I don't think we do. I think guys like Klaus Schwab, guys like Bill Gates, guys like Dr. Fauci, science and life improves one funeral at a time. I think Max Planck had it right. We need some of those people to die. Voltaire said the same thing about politicians. Sometimes a good assassination is not a bad thing. Happened with the French. It's happened with, the British. It's even happened in the United States. And I think that there's a lot of people in the industrial, military, and healthcare complex that need to be eliminated. And the public right now in the United States has an opportunity to start, doing some via negative. They really do. People are madder than hell right now. I can tell you this SV40 story is a big deal, but I think the mitochondrial medicine thing's a big deal. It's the reason I want to sit down and talk to Bobby Kennedy about it. I want to see where his head was at. And even though he's an old dog like me, I think he's motivated for the same reason. Why? The people in power killed his uncle and killed his father.
Yeah.
And they've tried to ruin his life by painting him as a black sheep of the Kennedy family. Even Kennedy's own family has done some of the same things to try to make it so you won't elect him. I look at it like this. I hope no candidate gets to 270. I hope it leads to absolute destruction in American cities. Why? I think we need to burn it down, just like we did in the American Revolution. Just remember what Benjamin Rush said. The American Revolution didn't end once we made the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It was the first act in a great play that's still ongoing. I believe that we're now on Act 25 or 30. And right now, medical tyranny is being used to try to destroy our founding documents and take away our liberty, life, and the pursuit of happiness. Therefore, I believe everybody who listens to this podcast, you are like Paul Revere. You have to decide, are you going to warn other people that these people are coming for your health? Okay? Because they are. They absolutely are coming for your health. They have no concern for your health. None. This is the reason why Bill Gates wants to release mosquitoes with viral vectors in them. It's the reason he wants to block the sun. It's the reason why he's buying farmland up in the West. It's the same reason why some of the stuff is going on in Israel. It's the same reason why the industrial military complex wants to run forever wars. They want to fucking control us and keep us as slaves on the plantation. They're just using different methods to do it. Your king is a perfect example of that. Perfect example. I told one of your countrymen not that long ago, I can't wait until he gets taken out to the woodshed like his mother did. He is a cancer for the people in the UK. But guess what? The people that are running your country aren't much better for the public health.
Well, the thing is, we didn't want Charles either. And when it comes to kings and queens in Britain, I think Albert and Queen Victoria are by far my favourites. Oh yeah, Queen Elizabeth I and John D and all of that era, they were great. And William Pitt was a brilliant prime minister. But ever since that, I can't really say anyone stood out. As far as the states go, what do you think of Franklin D. Roosevelt? Because he's a man I look up to, and just I'm not an American.
He's where we went off the tracks.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say gone off the tracks. Where we really went off the tracks, honestly, was when we probably killed Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And then it got really bad when the Serbian guy killed McKinley. And that's when we got Teddy Roosevelt. If you want to ask me, Teddy Roosevelt was the most important Roosevelt.
The one that he got shot when he was giving a speech because he had his notes in his chest. And yes, okay. Right. I know a lot about Teddy, but you give it the American perspective. And
yeah, FDR actually, to me, is the architect of the welfare state in the United States. And he actually, as far as I'm concerned, he made the Great Depression worse. And he's also the reason why Executive Order 6102 is actually in the Genesis block of Bitcoin, when he tried to, take gold away from people during the Depression. That's not the way to solve people's problems, to allow centralized controllers to lead us. Now, that's not to say that FDR didn't do some good things. Some of the things that I liked that he did was the expansion of, the federal land and national parks, and beginning to do some of that stuff through the Depression. But on the whole, I think he did more harm than good. And then if you really think about it, it was because of him that we got the March of Dimes and we got the fiasco with the polio vaccine and wound up with SV40. And
that's quite ironic. I know he didn't really have polio, FDR, but it's kind of ironic. He was tied up in all of that.
He did have polio.
I think some people, they question it now, whether he couldn't walk because of polio or something else. But I think the fundamental thing is he got tied up in his own. That's really interesting, but it's like blown a hole in my, because I revered FDR, but that's an example about you've got to keep looking for truths, and no matter what you read in the history books, it's been distorted, and that's come as a bit of a shock. But yeah, FDR's not perfect. Well, what about Teddy Roosevelt? Because I interrupted when you were going to say he's the pivot point.
Yeah, I think he was the pivot point. Why? Because he's the one that decided to go after Rockefeller, Carnegie, and JP Morgan. And unfortunately, he was successful, but that actual missile that he shot in is actually how we got Big Pharma, from Rockefeller. So the collateral effects of Teddy Roosevelt could be looked at with a negative connotation, but unfortunately his intent was good. But again, intent, the thing that I try to teach my members, intent is not germane to discussions. There's been more people killed when people have had good intent than anything else. And it's shocking when I say that to people, but it's because they're not aficionados of history. But in terms of presidents, I think he did right by the people. I don't think we've had a president in the United States since that I can honestly say really was all in, to be honest with you. Yeah, we got to get moving, Sarah. So guess what? We're going to have to end it. Okay?
I'm out. Okay.
All right. Hopefully we will do this again. I think this was good. If there's something else you want to talk about,
yeah,
we can do another podcast.
I was going to close it on.
Got to go do something right now.
The thing is, I was going to close it on how does nicotine change time dilation? Time. I know you haven't got time now, but I thought I'll have one question in there at the end about nicotine.
It does affect time. It does affect time dilation.
Yeah.
And it does have a net positive effect. But just like anything else, because it's an exogenous chemical that works, on something that's made endogenously, it does have a bad effect on NAD positive and NADH couple at cytochrome 1 with long-term use. So don't use it.
Well, or use it sparingly, because I thought UVA plus nicotine was the only way to actually make NAD plus, and all these supplements were shit, and that was an NAD plus. That's
a better way of doing it. I would tell you that's a better way of doing it than the way those guys are doing it. I'm just going to tell you, if you do it chronically, you're going to wind up with an issue.
Thank you very much for all the stuff that you do, and I'll do my best to keep pumping it out there and maybe start being a bit more aggressive.
Yeah, well, you're too nice. I need you to get your I don't want to say Irish up because I know you're from the UK, but it's okay. We need you.
I'm half Welsh. I need to get my dragon claws out.
There you go. I think that's good.
Okay, well,
all right, take care, Sarah. It was nice talking with you.
I have a new course out, Mighty Minerals and Sourcing Low Deuterium Food. There's currently 15% off. The link is in the description. And if you want something more ongoing, then you can join my monthly coaching group. So thank you very much for watching, and see you again soon.